Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here with Daphne Wells. And Daphne is a professionally certified and credentialed business success and freedom coach and numerologist. And Daphne helps heart-centered leaders, coaches, and healers get exactly what they want through her life-changing coaching, masterminds, and her book, Decide, Choose Your Own Path. She's here to shake up your approach to business and life. She delivers insanely powerful insights that give you radical permission to show up in your power and fulfill your purpose in the world. And when she's not inspiring women around the globe to make more money in record time, you'll find Daphne creating magic with fabric and threads, getting her hands dirty, growing what she eats, or frolicking in the waves. So Daphne, you sound like my kind of a woman. Welcome to the show. And can you start us off and tell me, what is your story? What brought you to this point in your life?
Lots of things brought me to this point in life. It's a real culmination of finding myself in amongst not knowing who I was, realizing, coming to a point where I realized I had no idea who Daphne was. You know, we go through school, we in my day here in New Zealand, there was pressure to be married by a certain age and have children by a certain age. And my children are now all adults. And so I did that and had children. And then at the end of that, it was like, so who is Daphne? You know, and so my journey since, since my children were at school and becoming independent as they do, was, well, who am I? What is my life about? It was kind of like I'd done this piece of my life. What was next?
Ooh, Daphne, I love that, right? And I think that you bring up such an important point, which is that for many of us, many women and men too, it's easy to kind of fall into that idea of, well, this is just what you do, and especially when there's that societal pressure, like, okay, you got to get married, tick, have a family, tick, right? You're kind of checking the boxes, and then you go through it all, and then you wake up and you're like, okay, well, wow, who's Daphne? Like, in all of that, I did the things, right? Who am I? So was there a moment in that process, like as you were raising your family, did you have whispers that said, who's Daphne? Or was it really kind of at the culmination of that transition from them into adulthood?
So there were whispers right the way through, like I'm very intuitive, and I didn't realize that for a lot of my life. It was kind of shut down as a child. I remember hearing voices and knowing that there was more to life than what was presenting itself as being available. And when I kind of questioned that, it was shut down. And so, that becomes a story that then you don't actually, you tune that little voice out.
Yeah.
And do what is expected. Well, this is my story. This is what happened to me. And then in amongst children growing up, marriage coming to a completion, I started to hear those voices again. It was like, so what is next? Who is Daphne? Where is she going next? And so I kind of floundered for many years and did a lot of different things. I had a very successful business as a style and image consultant way back before the internet, way back before that was the in thing to do, and burned out really, really badly because as a woman I was giving to children, giving to clients. And then ended up a few years down the track coming out of a marriage in a very vulnerable situation and being befriended by a man who, purported to be there for my best interests and my children. And over the course of a few years, he got to manipulate and control me to the point where I was literally his puppet. And I Lost a lot of money through that. Lost myself in the process again. I was starting to find myself and lost myself again. Ended up owning a dairy herd and breeding dairy cattle. And there was a point in that time where I woke up one morning and thought, this is not my life. Who am I? I was more lost than I'd ever been.
Yeah.
And at that point, how we grow up with these fairy tales of the Prince Charming comes in on the white horse and saves the girl, and they go off and get married, and it's a happily ever after,
Yeah.
And I, looking back, I was in this very vulnerable place when this man came into my life, and I kind of thought, well, this is a different life to what I've ever lived as a young girl. I remember the idea of living on a farm was quite a romantic idea. I quite liked that idea. And so I thought, well, who knows? He might be, I guess, innocently, I presume that was the role he was playing. Realized that, no, he was actually like the bad man trapping me in his cage, what came into my mind then was a vision of me in a basket, those baskets that they used to back in the medieval times hang people in, and when they were imprisoned, and it was like I was there and I was just like doing what he wanted. And there was this, I remember one morning waking up and thinking, this has got to change.
So what?
And no one is coming to save me. I need to do it.
Yeah, I love that. And so tell me about that moment, that morning. Like, was it just, you just woke up and you just knew? Was it that the whispers had been getting stronger? Like, what happened in that moment?
So I'd kind of been on a searching journey for a few years. I had at that point done my coach training, and I was a certified coach, and I was coaching on the side of running this dairy herd. And that was where I wanted to go in my life. I had kind of decided, but I was being sidetracked. And I realized in that moment that I actually wasn't living my life. I was living a life that that man had determined I should live.
Yeah.
And that was a huge wake-up call. And, it's like one thing that came into my mind was that, do you remember that movie, The Holiday?
Yeah.
And Arthur is his name, and he says to, I can't remember the star's name, but he says, you're not playing the leading lady in your role, in your life. It's like you're playing the best friend.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
So that morning kind of I knew that I couldn't, I knew I had to navigate my way out without that man knowing that that was what I was doing, or the repercussions of that would be unbearable for me, and I would end up more and more trapped. So it did take me some time. It took a lot of courage and a lot of tenacity and belief in myself. Like through that time, and yet I do remember feeling very ashamed of where I'd gotten to in my life. There was like feeling like I was an absolute failure, like I had done all these things wrong. And there was also, I remember feeling like I couldn't share what was going on with anyone because that shame was too big.
Yeah. Daphne, I honor you and your journey. And, this is, I think you're sharing something so powerful, that this wake up process, it's truly, it's not like we flip a switch and we've got it all figured out right? Like we start to wake up and maybe we have that moment, maybe we have moments over time, and it doesn't mean that just because we woke up that, okay, now everything is different, right? Because we've been living in a certain way, and we've got a certain pattern of showing up for ourselves, showing up in the world. And so it's so common, and, to really find ourselves waking up and then actually repeating the pattern a little bit. And then that shame where we just beat ourselves up for it, when really we're doing the best that we can. And if we don't know any better, right? And we might cognitively know better, but if we don't know actually how to do the better for us, of course we're going to continue to kind of show up in that way.
Yeah. And so then from that moment began the journey of really exploring who I was, how I could navigate my way out of that, finding supporters who I could trust and who, would love me in the process and support me in it.
And really moving past the shame, not letting that shame completely silence you.
And being courageous enough to be vulnerable in it.
Yeah.
I had a conversation with my best friend the other week, actually, and somehow in our conversation we went back to that time, which was around that time was when she and I first met. And she told me the story about how she could see the walls that I had up around me, and it was like I wasn't letting anyone in.
Yeah.
And that, I know I was doing that. I didn't realize it was visible to others. And that for me was a self-protection. If I pretend everything's okay, if I, almost put on a mask when I leave the house so that the world doesn't know what's going on inside of me. And it's really hard to unmask, to let those walls down, to break down those barriers.
And so how did you come to develop that relationship with yourself? How did you really learn who is Daphne? And then during that process, how did you consciously choose to let those walls down a bit? Because I think like boundaries, and we were talking about that a little bit in the pre-show, boundaries are important. So that's a healthy thing, to be clear. We want boundaries, right? But it's that choice, that boundary, that's self-protective, but in a loving way.
And that's a really good point, because what I did realize in that process was that I had never really had boundaries. I was kind of, as a woman, I was brought up, I cannot speak for other women, I was brought up as, you're here to be the good wife, you're here to be the mother, you're here to serve people, you're here to do this, do that, do the other for everybody else. And there was no sense of me as a person. And
which makes sense why you would have walls. Like, because we don't have boundaries, we have to build walls.
Exactly.
I feel like my brain just exploded. Oh my gosh. Wow.
When we don't have boundaries, we build walls.
Wow.
That is so true.
Right?
And so a lot of that journey out of there was gradually really spending a lot of time in contemplation over what I did want, what I was prepared to allow and not allow into my life, and creating some boundaries and actually learning to say no. Who knew I could say no to anyone who asked me to help with anything without having to justify it. Like, no,
right?
It's a complete sentence.
And so to get to that point of being able to say no, right? In a way that feels good to you. You have to know, well, what does feel good to me? So how did you learn about Daphne and about what was important to her and about what she would want to say yes to and what she'd want to say no to?
So I started off, as I said, I was already a certified coach by then. So I
Yeah.
almost went back and did all that work on myself, like
Yes.
deciding, like identifying what my values were, what was
Hmm.
important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so if these things are important to me, like my core values are
Mm-hmm.
courage, kindness, and creativity,
Mm.
and freedom.
Mm.
I wasn't even being kind to me, let
Yeah.
alone was anyone else. I was being very courageous, not
Mm-hmm.
always in a way that served me, in a way that
Mm.
served other people. I certainly had no freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was about, well, what boundaries do I need to put in place so that I have more of this and I can be
Yeah.
more of me? And it was
Yeah.
also identifying the practical things that I like to do in life.
Mm.
Like you read in my bio, I love
Mhm.
going to the beach. I love frolicking in the waves. I love
Yeah.
to grow what I eat.
Yeah.
I love to play with fabric and thread and create magic with that, create fun things. And so it was
Mhm.
about actually, well, I need some time for these things rather than
Mhm.
being out in paddocks all the time, being in the dairy
Yeah.
shed, like I need
Yeah.
some time for me. And it was also putting boundaries around, um, because setting those boundaries and deciding I wanted me meant navigating the way to evict the man from my house,
Mm.
and shed myself of the dairy herd, ideally
Mm.
on the same day,
Okay.
because that was the
Uh, Spring cleaning to the max.
it was the only way I could figure out how to do it, was they had to
Yeah.
happen on the
Yeah.
same day. So you can imagine all the jigsaw puzzle pieces that had to go in
Yeah.
there. And there was also, so then if I don't have the income from the milk, I need to be building up my coaching business so I can,
Yeah.
there's all these practical things that we need to put in place. So, there was probably a journey of, I want to say, at least 18 months, if not a couple of
Mm.
years, from that moment I realized to the moment that I
Mm.
actually pulled it off and the cows
Mm.
left and the man left on the same day. um,
I love that, Daphne, because I think so often, and I'm talking about myself here right now, and
mhm,
certainly it's something I hear with in conversation with other women, is that when we realize it, we get to that wake up call, that aha moment, we're like, okay, now I want it now. Right. And knowing that, okay, it can take some time.
mhm.
It's truly a process. It's a journey. And so,
And I
oh,
also
sorry.
want to say it doesn't necessarily have to take that long. I mean, most
Yes.
people in that situation would not have that dual, the man
Yeah.
and the cows that had to be worked out at the same time, because I was in essence responsible for those cattle. So,
Yeah.
getting removing the man from the scene meant that he was helping with the animals, right? He had more
Mm.
knowledge in that area than I did. And
Mhm.
so that was why it had to happen at the same time,
Mm.
because otherwise I was going to be out of my depth and swimming
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
sinking.
Yeah. And truly knowing that in each moment we're doing the best that we can
Mhm,
with what we're working with, right? And to have that
mhm.
grace and compassion. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
And I
so,
knew too that I couldn't share it with many people because
mm,
otherwise he would find out.
oh,
And then the repercussions for me personally in that
yeah.
would be, I'm not even going to go there on this call.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, for some of us, we're able to kind of step out and be in full congruence. And certainly, I think as we go through this process of becoming the main character of our lives, there are times where maybe we're, like in some areas we can be that main character, but in other areas we're still kind of figuring it out. And so it's okay for it to look messy during the process. If it doesn't have to look messy, like we're open to it being easy, and it's okay if it looks a bit messy.
It sure is. And remembering that we are human. We are gonna mess up. We are gonna make some mistakes along that way. I mean, if I look back honestly at that time span, even as I was navigating my way out, I could have done things differently in retrospect. And we always know better when we're on the other side. When we're in there, it's hard to see.
And so looking back, would you, if you could give yourself some advice or impart some wisdom or knowing to that earlier version of yourself, what would that be?
Seek help earlier. Keep knocking on doors until you get the help you need.
Yeah. And so did you have guides and mentors along the way to support you in that process?
I did in some areas, and in some areas, some of the practical areas, I was too scared to knock on doors. Because of that shame. It was, I felt like it was, coaches and mentors, it was fine talking to them about it and helping them navigate on how I managed me in the process, right? The practical things, I found it really hard to go to anyone who knew what, And so looking back, I would encourage myself and anyone else in a similar situation to just keep knocking until you get all the help you need, and not feeling like you have to hide.
And you bring up such a good point, Daphne. I think so often we look, and I say this all the time, we look to other people's highlight reels and think that that's their life, right? And we compare their best day to our worst day. And we all have best days and worst days, right? And so really having that grace and compassion for yourself as you navigate whatever it is that you're navigating. And so if you could impart some words of wisdom, right, to the people listening here today, from your heart to their heart, if there was a message, and I know someone out there is meant to receive this, what would that be?
Put yourself first. Really, self-love, we hear about it all the time, and yet if we are not honoring and loving ourselves and actually having a relationship with ourselves, then we are not serving anyone else either. It's like that, we hear about the cup, and if our cup isn't full, then we have nothing to give anyone else. And yet so often we give from the fumes because we are depleted, because we are not receiving anything ourselves. And I don't mean self-love and having to spend a whole lot of money and go to the spa and do things that you don't have the time or the money for a lot of the time. It's about that, really putting yourself first. Does this honor me? Because the reality is, if we're being kind to ourselves and loving ourselves like we do others, then we are in essence loving other people as well. And when we're not really putting ourselves first like that, we are also telling people energetically that we're not important and they can treat us any way they want. And that they are more important than us because we are treating them better than we treat ourselves.
And that can be a challenging one to wrap your head around.
Incredibly challenging, and like kindness is one of my core values, and kindness to me means treating other people as I want to be treated. Now, I couldn't have said that 10 years ago. I was being kind to everyone else and I wasn't being kind to me. And when we actually define our values and place the statement around, this is how I'm showing up when I'm being these things, then we actually have to own it for ourselves.
Yeah.
Or we give ourselves permission to own it.
Ooh, I love that.
And be that to ourselves. Because
Yeah.
I think that's a lot of, I know for me, that was a lot of my stuff was actually, was I allowed to do that? Was I actually allowed to put myself first?
And I believe that we, as you said, we have to do that for ourselves, right? Like we can only fill our own cups.
We cannot rely on other people to do it.
Yeah.
It's not their place to do it.
Yeah. They need to fill their cups.
Exactly. You know, and then we play with our cups together, right?
Yes. Go frolicking in the extras.
Exactly. You know, if we are not coming into any relationship, whether it's with a friend, with a significant other, with our children, with clients, with anybody, if we are coming in with an empty cup, we have nothing to give, and we're giving people permission to treat us badly.
Yeah.
And, you know, looking back, I did that for a lot of years.
Yeah. And truly, it's never too late to learn to love yourself, right? And to discover who is Daphne, who's Katherine, who is whoever's listening to this. Who am I? What is important to me? What are my values? What do I love to do with my time? Do I want to go frolicking in the ocean, or working in the garden, or is the spa day my thing? Like whatever that is, what do I love for me?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's what do I want makes me happy. And there's nothing selfish about that. I think that's the other thing that I was certainly brought up with, was you can't put yourself first because that's being selfish. And in actual fact, there is a line where it can become selfish if we are all consuming. Most of us, though, never get to that point.
Yeah. And certainly I've experienced and believe that when we are putting ourselves first in that really authentic way, where we're really connecting to actually what matters to us, that's not selfish.
No.
Right. The selfishness can kind of come from trying to fill that in a different way, but truly when it's really about what our heart and soul is wanting for us, it doesn't go into the selfish realm.
Because what our heart and soul wants for us also is for us to be us, to show up fully as us, and then for us to make our contribution to the world, because we are all born into this life with a role to play that contributes to society. And so if we are being true to ourselves and really know ourselves and are loving and honoring ourselves, then part of that is giving to others. And so we never get to that, as you said quite rightly, when we are really honoring ourselves and know who we are and why we're here, and amongst that.
Yeah. It's a whole other level of fulfillment and peace and joy and all of that.
And it's never selfish. It's like we are,
it's joyful.
It is. It's joyful. And that's what makes the world go round, is when we're all doing our bit.
Yeah. And then when you have that joy and love in your heart, and that's how you're living, you just authentically want to share and express that with other people.
Yeah, you're sharing your magic and your gift out there all the time, because that's just who you are, right? Once you really know who you are.
Yeah. So Daphne, how can people connect with you? Where can they find you?
So they can find me on social media or at my website, which is my name, daphnewells.com. And, you know, if you have any questions or want to book a chat with me, there's a link on there to do that.
Perfect. And I will include that in the show notes as well. And so, Daphne, I want to thank you so much for connecting with me and sharing your inspiring story. And and truly the journey that you undertook to discover who is Daphne. What is her unique role to play in this world? How does she bring her gifts and talents and magic to the world? So thank you so much for being here today. And thank you to everybody who is tuned in. And as always, I would love it if you would like and subscribe and do all the podcast things. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.